By the middle of 1993, when the West Lake Sewerage Scheme comes online, secondary treated waste from the western side of Lake Macquarie will be flowing into the ocean off Belmont. Will the amount of effluent flowing out there be as great as, say, what's going out at Burwood?
We expect to be about as great, and as the growth occurs along the west side of the lake, with the new freeway coming through, etc., we think it'll be greater in the long term.
Member for Charlestown Richard Face believes Dudley, Belmont and Redhead beaches could become infested with pollution like Bondi Beach in Sydney.
They've got sewage outfalls on either side of them. You've got one at Burwood that will eventually be on secondary treatment. You've got one at Belmont that will take all of the west side sewage.
But Paul Broad of the Hunter Water Board says every consideration is being taken in the planning of the outfall. The pipe will extend about 1.5 kilometres off the coast where the current sewage pipe is, and extensive testing of current flow is being carried out to establish the movement of effluent once it is released. Another concern raised by Mr Face is that in heavy rain the pipes under the lake could overflow. Although Mr Broad admits this could happen in times of extreme flooding, he says everything is being done to prevent it.
What we're building into the system on the West Lake is a set of catchments. So the first big flows that come into the sewage system with heavy rain will be caught in basically big holding tanks. And as the flow in the sewer drops, we'll then release what's in the tanks out through the outfall.
The Tocal Small Farm Field Days must be the only open-air show in the world where organisers are hoping for a downpour.
All of us are praying for rain. For the field days, I think we can absorb a certain amount of rain. I'm sure we can all suffer it very happily.
It's the 8th year of the program, giving newcomers to the land an A to Z guide to running a property, plus a few tips for the more experienced. Farmers can come to Tocal to find out about the latest in agriculture. This fella here, a crayfish, offers a boom market both in Australia and overseas. Crayfish can sell for $25 per kilo, or maybe growing these strange-looking relations to the camel is more your style. Alpacas are shorn like sheep for their fleece or fibre. A good male can cost $30,000. Exhibitions are given in sheepdog trials and milking the house cow. But for those considering to buy stock, be warned.
So if you take on any animal, please take on your responsibilities, know what you're getting in for before you go into it.
The Horse Rescue Group has saved 40 horses in the last 5 years after owners simply dumped them to starve. The Small Farm Field Days will continue tomorrow and Sunday.
For Jack Green, his last day as principal was a lot more than he expected. His students surprised him with a ceremony recognising his contribution to the school over the last 15 years.
Your Majesty, when the animals, birds and children of East Mountain Primary School heard you were leaving, they were all very sad. So they collected money and bought this sundial and bird bath so they would always remember you.
They've built a garden in the grounds of the school which they've called Nutcote Green. It's a sign of the students' affection for him.
I'll miss him a lot.
I don't think the full reality will hit home until next week, possibly, when I get up and I say, I'm not going to school today. Because after all, I have been going to school since I was 5 years of age.
Jack Green gave us the benefit of a few classroom tips.
There's a simple recipe for establishing the right educational climate. You work through the strong leaders of the school, if you like, in inverted commas, the good children. They in turn lead those who can be a little awkward to manage along the right path, the good path.
Mr Green will be remembered fondly, and no doubt he'll have a few happy memories of his own. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
an opportunity for a Bob Hawke here, isn't it? There'll be an election for both houses of the New South Wales Parliament.
Over the years, the Newcastle Region Art Gallery has built up a collection of portraits to rival any, and for the first time, they're all on show. Each painting has its own story, painstakingly researched by assistant curator Alison Farrer. Adelaide Ironside was the first Australian artist to travel overseas. This is her self-portrait painted in 1855.
She had this unrequited love for a man, and so because he didn't love her as she was, she's drawn herself as she'd ideally like to be.
Among the earlier works in the exhibition is this painting of John Buckland. It was the first portrait ever painted in New South Wales and is dated 1814. Works by William Dobell also feature in the collection, including his famous portrait of a strapper painted in 1941. There's also a local flavour, with prominent identities like Harry Wheeler and Laurie Short appearing.
People would have seen a few of them in Newcastle before. We tend to show the strapper a lot, of course. But no one, I don't think anyone would have seen all of these actually hung together before.
Bob Carr isn't taking no for an answer. He says Nick Greiner will introduce a consumption tax, slugging families at least $750 extra per year in groceries alone. In a supermarket in Hamilton today, he said all goods would be increased by 15% under Greiner to pay for a $1.5 billion deficit.
That Mr Greiner has the power, notwithstanding anything else in the Constitution, to spread a consumption tax over the full range of commodities.
Mr Carr said Labor faced a critical battle in the Hunter, needing a 3% swing to regain Newcastle, 0.3% in Cessnock and 8.1% in Swansea.
We expect to win the 3 seats. It's going to be a battle. I couldn't take it for granted.
While he admitted the party was kicked in the pants in 1988, he said threats of price hikes would sway voters. Lavish Carr promises to improve roads and education, he said would be paid by lean government. More promises on Newcastle Harbour. Taking a ferry trip from Stockton, the opposition leader guaranteed the service would stay under a Carr government. Angry Stockton locals fear the Greiner government will remove the ferry. Earlier today, member for Charlestown Richard Face launched the ALP's policy for the hotel industry, appropriately enough, in a Katara pub. Mr Face said a Greiner plan to deregulate liquor laws, opening up another 3,000 liquor outlets in the state, would ruin the established industries. But later, local hoteliers at the launch admitted the Greiner plans had already been officially scrapped. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
The house shares the grounds of the St Joseph's Convalescent Home. It's named after a Polish Catholic priest who died in 1941 at the Auschwitz concentration camp. Colby had comforted, encouraged and finally died in the place of fellow inmates. He's regarded as a saint by many. The $1.7 million nursing home, built with federal government funds, will house 21 residents, many who fled Eastern Europe to take up new lives in Australia, often working in local heavy industries. Their needs are special.
We're putting people together from the same language backgrounds, and then we can play a little more detail to their food and cultural needs, and you'll notice throughout the building that a lot of those things have been given close attention.
Maitland's Bishop Leo Clark blessed the home, which was opened by the Federal Minister for the Aged, Peter Staples. The home will be managed by the Catholic Church and accept its first patients within weeks.
Archbishop Bevan Meredith is on his way home to Papua New Guinea after visiting Britain for the enthronement of the Archbishop of Canterbury. This year is the centenary of the Anglican Church in Papua New Guinea. Although Christianity has come a long way, there is still much to do. 3 years ago, copper mining on the island of Bougainville ceased because of unrest by rebels. Today, those internal problems haven't been resolved, but things are improving.
Well, they are improving. Supplies are getting back, and people are now saying we're fed up with this BRA people and we want to get something back again.
Lately, the problems on Bougainville have taken a backseat to the violence on the mainland. The Archbishop, however, is reluctant to speak of the social problems plaguing Port Moresby.
Is it safe?
Well, I mean, people come there and live there. I live there, and I don't live in Moresby, but I mean, I visit there, and it's quite safe, and much safer there than here, I think.
But with thousands of unemployed people flocking to the city, violence is an everyday part of life in Port Moresby. Even the police force has been labelled as corrupt. But the Archbishop sees a change for the better here too.
When troubles come, all our officers are young and inexperienced. In a new country, you can't help that. And it's the same in business, the same in everything. They're all young and inexperienced. They're gaining experience. While here, a person like that doesn't get to the top in one jump. But when you're in a young country, a new country, and after independence, people say we must localise this, that and the other. And you get all these young people without experience trying to run it, and that's where the problem comes.
According to the Archbishop, there is a common misconception about life in the capital.
People highlight these things if there's an attack, but how many attacks do you have here? Every day I open the paper you have attacks. And but because there's a much bigger population here, you think it's not important.
The country is caught up in change. The Archbishop believes Papua New Guinea is going forward.
Somebody came the other day, been away 27 years, and he was absolutely amazed at the progress that's been made. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I went in the bank, there wasn't a white face in the bank, and everything was running. And the post office, the same thing. I go everywhere. I came up on a plane from Brisbane, the whole cabin staff of Papua New Guinea. And he said, you know, and I stopped to think, I said, well, that's true, but you don't notice it. I come down here, all the white faces, it sort of hits me. Have a culture shock in reverse.
Down at Randon, so I'll talk about that in a minute. So the trust attitude Orient to Victorian and so on. Now, as the trust attitude is that they represent the townscape, they represent what we want to do is that there are really 5 and stop the demolition.
Now, it may go down. It may.
At a group luncheon today, Colin Chapman applauded the efforts of local First National agents and the group's record turnover in the last financial year. Then he turned on the federal government, accusing it of political cynicism.
There's an election due at the end of next year. They don't want the economy running this year and have to put the interest rates back up late next year and then go to an election. They want it to be coming back full stream when they go to an election to give them a chance of being re-elected.
But Liberal governments were not exempt from Mr Chapman's attack. He also had some advice for the Greiner government. Mr Chapman says people are leaving New South Wales because of unfair taxes and believes they should be overhauled. The latest interested Carrington Slipways buyer is the Australian Submarine Corporation. The South Australian-based company has been evaluating the Slipways' potential for some weeks. Today, the corporation's managing director, Dr Don Williams, was hesitant to clarify the company's interest in the Slipway, but said, "We saw a potential opportunity to acquire an asset at a very competitive price, so we're having a look at it." Carrington Slipways went into receivership with reported outstanding debts of $25 million just before Christmas. The receiver, Price Waterhouse, put the company on the market after deciding it could not trade out of difficulty. There have been several expressions of interest, a local consortium headed by former Alco Steel owner Manuel Alves, which failed to raise enough money, and a suggestion from Mayor John McNaughton that the people of the Hunter could muster the funds the industrialists couldn't find. So at this stage, the Submarine Corporation's interest looks the most promising for Carrington. After all, it's a large company backed by Swedish shipping giant Kockums and a government-backed development body, and it holds a $4 billion submarine contract. The corporation hopes to make a decision on whether to bid for Carrington Slipways within 3 months.
The recommended upgrading of Singleton Infantry Training Centre is overdue, to say the least. During peak training periods, up to 1,000 military and civilian staff and Army students use the camp, occupying uncomfortable quarters installed more than 20 years ago as temporary accommodation.
The buildings, for a start, are old-fashioned. They don't equate with what we regard as modern community standards for communal housing. They're hot in the summer, very hot indeed, cold in the winter because of their structure, and they're detached from the ablution blocks for the soldiers, so there's many a 3 o'clock dash to have a shower before going out in the field in the middle of winter.
Commandant Colonel Peter Cosgrove says tenders for the construction of modern 1- and 2-storey brick quarters should be called before the year is out, with work beginning early next year. The Joint Standing Committee on Public Works inspected the camp in February, reporting to Parliament that living and working accommodation was dilapidated and below approved standards. The new plan will house about the same number of instructors and students, but facilities will be more comfortable, less scattered and better laid out.
We train the soldiers very, very hard indeed, and they spend a lot of time in the field, and it's our notion to make sure they're as comfortable as they can be when they have a chance to relax.
The $29.3 million project is just the first stage of a $90 million program to redevelop the entire base over several years. The committee also endorsed a $35 million upgrading of the Army's munitions storage facilities at Meyerbat near Denman. Local wine growers objected to the siting of the dump, claiming that the use of explosives near the site would cause chemical-laden smoke to contaminate nearby vineyards. But Singleton Chamber of Commerce President Chris Lancaster says the town is looking forward to the prospect of extra revenue from construction contracts. 7 of the 9-member Australian women's polo-cross team arrived in the Hunter to prepare for the weekend test. The Kiwis are also assembling their team and getting a look at the opposition. Several of the players on both sides met in New Zealand in 1988 for their first Trans-Tasman clash. On that occasion, Australia won on a countback after the test concluded on a 1-1 draw. Traditionally, the advantage goes to the home side as the visitors are required to ride horses provided by the host country. So Australian captain Bev Hughes believes her team has an edge.
Yes, most of the girls have done nationals before, represented their state, so yes, there's quite a bit of experience.
On the New Zealand side, there's at least equal depth and they'll be riding particularly good mounts, which the team hopes will more than even up the odds.
You feel confident of evening up the score?
No problem whatsoever. We've got some pretty classy horses under us, so yes, we are very confident.
Please.
The seminar coincided with the imminent legalisation of Pacific oyster farming in Port Stephens. Although the industry flourishes in New Zealand and Tasmania, Port Stephens is the only area in New South Wales where it has won government approval.
I've got great faith in the ability of oyster farmers to develop the technology to produce Pacific oysters efficiently. It is being done in the other states. I would hope that we will have a viable industry here in Port Stephens.
But the other states will have a head start. Every bag of Pacific oysters grown in Port Stephens will attract an $80 service levy. The government makes no secret of its motives.
What we're really trying to do is protect the Sydney rock oyster industry, which is a unique product. We don't want to encourage Pacific oysters elsewhere.
The New South Wales Shellfish Association hopes to have the decision reversed, and officials were guarded in their criticism of the plan.
It doesn't make it easy when you're trying to regain viability and market a new product and develop the growing techniques for it. We've been disappointed in that. We hope the government might see that our case is such that it's a liability for us, and hope they see the light and remove it.
But local growers were predicting the worst.
There will be no profit in it whatsoever, and we can't compete with other states.
It'll be a disaster for the industry, because what farmer can farm oysters and sell them and make a profit at $80 a bag levy?
I'd hate to even think of it, because they'll nearly make us close our door, I suppose.
Member for Port Stephens, Bob Martin, says Minister for Agriculture and Fisheries, Ian Armstrong, must scrap the idea or risk ruining the industry.
The Minister must not have a selective tax and get on with the job of letting these people go about their business.
Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.